So, boys, welcome to the show. Lovely to meet you. I think you were my first show with founders that I have not met before. So we've literally just met. So this is going to be the most interesting one because I don't know any of the answers to any of the questions I'm going to ask you, which is pretty cool. So why don't we start? Benjamin, why don't you start? Tell us about Dovetail. Tell us what Dovetail is, how it came about, and what you actually do.
Sure. So we are about 3.5 years old now.
Yep.
We do user research software for B2B businesses. So customers like Atlassian, Shopify, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, GitLab. So mostly...
Just a few small companies.
Yeah, so mostly US, European customers. We're 20 people now. We've grown this year from about 3 people about like 15 months ago to 20 people.
It's pretty rapid.
Yeah. And so it started back in 2017. My background is in design. I worked at Atlassian as a designer, and I'm a Kiwi, and left Atlassian in 2017. Convinced Brad to join Dovetail as a co-founder, and started this thing. And we were just kind of the two of us working out of our kitchens for 18 months. No funding or anything. And then we hired someone and decided to raise a bit of money when we were profitable, and now we're kind of...
Why the kitchen? Why not the dining room?
Why not the dining room? I mean, we were kind of... I had this sort of island in the kitchen.
Okay, makes sense.
We'd sit on the island.
Makes sense. When you've got those beautiful islands, they're a nice space. Why not?
Yeah, it was comfortable. We didn't have any air on chairs or anything like that. But yeah, so that's what we do. We build software for businesses, and it's collaborative, cloud-based software for research. So we help teams analyze unstructured data. So often interviews, usability testing sessions, survey responses, NPS and things.
So is it modern market research? Is that what it is? In a really raw and unsophisticated manner, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, so like market research is like pretty old school, right? Like, so that's like marketing teams do market research, that focus
Standing behind one-way mirrors.
Right, that sort of thing. Yep. So we don't really do like that stuff.
No.
What we do is operate in a product team. So like, you've got like user experience designers and user researchers, product managers. So they use the product to like make sense of qualitative data. So they'll do interviews, kind of similar to market research. They'll do interviews, usability testing, surveys and things. There's also like voice of the customer is a thing now. So like NPS responses, connecting like delighted or ask nicely. So we help teams kind of analyze this stuff. So tagging it and making sense of it, we transcribe it and everything. And then also storing it so that they can leverage that data at a later time. Yep. So like if you're at Atlassian, for instance, you build up this kind of repository of knowledge, and you have this big product team, and so people can log in and search through previous research and find it. So,
is it quite scientific?
I wouldn't say it's particularly scientific. It's quite manual at the moment. So it's a real productivity kind of tool. It's like for researchers, it's like an IDE. It's where you spend a lot of time every day. Yeah. And they're using it like how developers use VS Code, or how like designers use Sketch and Figma. It's kind of the same sort of thing. Okay. Yeah. And what
about you, Bradley? What were you doing before Benjamin persuaded you to go and work at your kitchen? Have you got what's your island like in your kitchen? Is it luxurious or?
My place was actually a little bit smaller than yours, but we would mix it up and work from each other's place a couple times a week. But no, so I got started because we were both working at Atlassian together.
So you were at Atlassian as well?
I was at Atlassian together with Benjamin, and we were working on Jira. We were on the same product, but weren't on the same team per se. Yep. Like we weren't working. We'd play some games in the afternoon, mess around, that sort of stuff. But so I met Benjamin quite early on, and then later at my time at Atlassian, we were actually working together. So in the last 12 months, you were the designer, I was the architect on a new platform team. Yep. And it kind of spun off from there. So you'd got started about 6 months before I came on board, and you'd managed to build something, outsource it to some Polish developers, and get some traction. And to me, that was just a huge sign of conviction. Absolutely. Because it was stepping outside your design skills into engineering, building a whole product. And so for me, it was like, this is probably the best time to do a startup. I was quite curious, like, what is the whole thing about? Originally, I was from Brisbane, and coming to Sydney, there's a whole like bars around startups.
There is.
And yeah, I didn't really know what it was about. And I like learning about things by diving into them and experiencing it firsthand. So it was a big adventure, leap of faith, I think, but it's been pretty awesome.
That's good. And look, you've mentioned earlier that you've grown quickly.
Yep.
I guess you both were at Atlassian for a little while. Were you there during the period where that grew very quickly? And do you think that's helped you get... Because one of the hardest things is scaling a business and scaling a business quickly and keeping control, because it can just spiral, right? And we see it all the time when we're helping companies scale quite quickly, that people get quite overwhelmed. Do you think your time there, seeing... I mean, it was at a different level, but similar problems, just on a larger scale. Do you think that's helped you both?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so when I joined, I think Sydney was probably 400 or 500 people.
So still pretty sizable.
Pretty sizable. I think Dovetail's a long way from that at the moment, but we were working in small teams.
Yeah, of course.
And in Jira, there's a bunch of small teams, and so that kind of emulates a small business.
Yep.
You've got to make trade-offs around like, what do you work on? Who are the right people to work on these things? Team composition, roadmaps. So all of that, I think, was an awesome kind of learning ground for how do you coordinate a bunch of people to arrive at an outcome, and how do you figure out what the goals should be. So yeah, it was very instrumental.
Okay. And Benjamin, talk to me about, I guess, funding. So if you've watched some of the other clips, which I think you said you'd watched a couple of them last night, I think I've talked to a couple of people about this, and it's because we get asked or particularly I get asked so many times, and we work with a lot of private equity firms and we work with a lot of VCs, but they don't ask me. It's everybody who's not working with them asks me, how do you get funding? How do you go about it? And I think if you watched Gillian from Vamp talk about getting the right kind of funding as well, is just as important as getting funding. Talk me through your experience. You said you've already got a little bit of how you went about that, and whether you had any help, and how you feel it went.
Yeah, sure. So we actually started a business out, and we were thinking it was going to be like a lifestyle business. So I had this idea of like building a happy, healthy, crunchy company.
Hence the kitchen.
So we left Atlassian, and the idea was, let's just kind of chip away at something and see if we could get to $100,000 a year in revenue.
Yep.
I think it was actually 120, so we could pay ourselves $60,000 each, and that's enough to pay our rent and buy a bit of food. So that was kind of our first goal.
Yep.
And we never intended to take any venture capital money. Like, we were fortunate enough that we worked at Atlassian for about 4 years each. Started around the same time in 2013, and so we were there 2 years before IPO, 2 years after, and so we did okay out of an IPO and the stock price and everything like that. So we were fortunate that, unlike a lot of other founders, you don't have a lot of capital starting out. So we could start out and bootstrap for a long time. So we did that for 18 months, and that was kind of just the plan. We didn't really intend to raise. Then, so that was 2017, 2018. We got to $100,000 in revenue, and realized that, and that took 12 months or so, and realized that we should hire another person, because Brad and I were getting a bit sick of each other, and we wanted to kind of have a culture.
And where was the lifestyle, right? There was none.
Yeah,
it's working all the time.
Right, because all the customers are in the US and Europe and stuff, and so we had one engineer, Brad, and me trying to be an engineer, and so he'd be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning on call. Awesome. There was no rotation.
Holidays were hard.
If you took a holiday.
This is not the lifestyle business we envisaged, right?
Right, 50% of the company's on holiday at any one time. And so we also just wanted the culture and a team, people to hang out with on Friday and have drinks with again, and we kind of missed that sort of stuff. It's quite alienating, actually, starting a startup and leaving a job, and you leave all of your colleagues, and neither of us are actually from Sydney either, so we tried to keep in touch with people in Sydney, and we had a monthly breakfast club that we did with other ex-Atlassians colleagues of ours. And so we did that, and we tried to keep in touch. But the thing is after 12, 18 months and working ourselves, and we had Wednesdays apart because 5 days a week, just the two of us. Actually, it was a bit of a joke. So when I was living in Kirribilli, our apartment had 2 entrances, the front door and the back door. The back door went straight into the kitchen. and Lucy, my girlfriend, would leave in the morning to go to work. And then Brad would arrive about 30 minutes later, but he'd come up the back entrance because that was where the kitchen was. And then he would leave like 30 minutes before Lucy came home. And I think like all my neighbours, because Kirribilli, right? So all the other people in the apartment probably thought like, I was having an affair.
What is going on here?
What is going on? So, so we had this thing, and so that was like for 12, 18 months. And then we hired Chris, our first hire, first engineer, and convinced him to join. And, that was pretty tricky because we didn't, I think it's hard when you're not like what's the value proposition of an early stage company
It's
when
a
you're
tough one
that
to
small?
sell. Trust me.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so like if you're not mission driven, like we're not making plant-based meat or going to Mars or something like that. So you're not mission driven, you're not VC funded, you don't have an office, there's no culture, it's just 2 people, 3 people.
Yep.
How do you attract, you've got a bit of revenue. So how do you attract early people was tricky, but we managed to get Chris, and then we moved into fish burners for a bit.
Yep.
And camped out at Riley Street in Surrey Hills for a week.
Oh, when it was back there.
Yeah, well,
Moved up to the.
yeah, we were in Riley Street for a bit, and then Fish Burners for a bit, and then back to Riley Street. We kind of moved around in these co-share offices, and then so the question was, VC money. So we basically ended up in 2019, so last year.
Mm-hmm.
We were getting to a point where we had a few $100,000 ARR. And we were profitable with 3 of us, but the kind of customer base and all of the stuff was getting away from us. Like we needed to hire more engineers. We weren't doing any marketing either, and we probably should have started doing marketing. And so we thought, and we were also struggling to hire people because our network was all Atlassians. As 2 people who relocated to Sydney for Atlassian, literally our friendship network and our colleagues.
Atlassian.
Yeah, and so all our friends were, big salaries, tied up with the equity, so we couldn't really convince them to leave Atlassian and join us. It was really difficult, the golden handcuffs and everything like this.
Yep.
So that was one problem, and then we just started to realise that we needed to grow the team for a variety of reasons. And we wanted to grow the team faster than we could afford to hire somebody. Like we added, however much revenue a month, but it wasn't quite enough to add 1 person a month.
Never is.
Like,
it's never quite enough. It's
Yeah.
a weird thing. I don't know why that is. I think the VCs have made it that way somehow.
they're plotting against us.
Exactly right.
So we were like, okay, that's interesting. And then we'd been talking to a few investors, and it was actually a really difficult decision. Like we agonized over it for like probably 6 weeks, deciding if we wanted to go and raise some money. But the actual process was quite straightforward because we were profitable. We had a bunch of good customers. The ex-Atlassian thing was appealing.
Yep.
And so we ended up, having Blackbird lead around for a $4 million seed round.
Yep.
Back in about September last year, and then we announced it earlier this year. And so that was kind of, we got good terms, and we sort of
Great
were
VC,
fortunate.
Blackbird. Very, what's the right word? Caring at VC.
Yeah, so like Nick Crocker is our partner at Blackbird, and we met Nick and the other partners, and we really like them, work a lot, like very closely with them. And the community they have built in Sydney with Canva and Propeller and safety culture, and it's really good, like having all these other founders to chat to. So there was some value add there, and I think that like for us, it wasn't as much about the cash as it was about the network and the advice and just honestly having someone who wasn't my girlfriend to talk to about the business because she was getting sick of it. Brad and I talked about Dovetail all the time, but you also need that sort of support network. And so that was helpful. Now I have a group of other founders in the portfolio that we chat with, and we have monthly dinners and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
So that's the value add for us. And the actual fundraising was fairly straightforward because we'd spent, 18 months, almost 2 years actually, bootstrapping to...
And profitable. I mean, that's not rare.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot easier if you have some traction, you have a product, you have customers, you have revenue, you have a good market, that you tick all these boxes. Like I think for fundraising, it's literally just ticking as many boxes as you can, experienced founders, complementary skill set, design, engineer, ex-Atlassian background helps, like the product. Like you just kind of tick all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think if you can do that, then
You
the
would have
fundraising
ticked a lot of boxes. You would
Well,
have
yeah.
probably all of them. Well, Blackbird don't go with anyone. They're pretty selective.
Yeah, I think we made a pretty good impression. I think, but
Well, you must have. They gave you a ton of money.
yeah.
So that's good.
And then we're fortunate as well to bring a couple of founders into the round too. And so, we have this kind of nice, diverse network of advisors and investors, which has been really helpful. So we have Felicis as our US investor. They put a wee bit of money in, and that's useful for us to get connections to the US as well. So
absolutely.
Critical for Aussie companies who are selling internationally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Okay. And look, one of the things, and you would have seen this on the list of questions I shot you, I do like to talk about things that have not necessarily gone well, because I'm a bit sick of hearing about everything's gone perfectly. And having had 3 businesses, I know it's just not the reality. So Bradley, why don't you tell me maybe some of the things that were, and it could have been before the funding, after the funding, funding in itself often presents a lot of problems that didn't exist before. So maybe what are some of the biggest ones or the ones that have affected you the most?
I think the biggest one is, like what Benjamin, you were talking about before, is just trying to convince people to join your company. It doesn't make sense to join and leave a good thing.
You've hit the nail on the head in that. I don't think a lot of people think that. It doesn't make, and obviously I'm selling startups all the time.
Right.
I'm trying to sell something that makes no sense.
Yeah.
And you have to convince them. And there is some sense in it, but it's how you do that.
And figuring out what that sense is hard to go for. Like, we weren't competitive on salary. We weren't competitive on office or team or mission. And so, like, why would you?
What's the value prop?
Like, we can.
What is the value prop?
We can beg and kind of twist your arm.
That's not ideal.
And that's not gonna work either. So, yeah, I think figuring out why would people join? What are the levers that make sense? What are the motivations? And then a really focused effort on improving those things. So, I remember we were talking about, a list of five or so things of like, these are what people will grade us on, like when they're considering Dovetail. And it was stuff like, even just the office, like the working environment. If you come into a co-working space, are you proud to show your friends where you work? Compared to if you're working at an established company and they've got, a nice office and...
Well, Atlassian's particularly difficult to compete against. There are plenty of other places that are not as nice.
Uphill battle.
Right. And so the people that we really wanted to bring on board were experienced sort of senior people.
Yep.
And that was extremely hard. I think that it does get a lot easier each time you get a new employee, because it's social proof. It's really strong social proof. Like even, it took you 6 months to convince me to join.
Oh my God, so long.
And I didn't kind of, appreciate that at the time. But to get the third person, that was super hard.
It's the hardest role. We've got quite a lot of those on at the moment, where we've got 2 founders wanting to hire their first person.
Yeah.
And it is without question, it doesn't matter whether it's a marketing person or a tech person, it's the hardest role.
Yeah.
It's the hardest role to get. And you're right, social proof, humans are social beings, right? So social proof is something. One of the things I've always believed, if you're going to get people to join your business, which is part of the reason we do this show, is being able to explain what your story is. And I think a lot of founders don't know what their story is because they just haven't had the time, they're founders, to even think about it. So how did you guys go about finding out and creating and then being able to articulate what your story was? Because obviously you've now got 20, so I'm sure you've got it nailed now. But tell us what the story is that you use to attract people.
I think I'll have a stab at it. Our first employee, he was coming from another startup. So I think that already selects, like if you look for people coming from startups are failing all the time. So people are moving around all the time. And those people are already sort of predisposed to being fine with the risk, enjoying the small team environment, have probably some sense of equity and what potential upside could be like, and enjoy the general environment of like being on the ground, being in the weeds, building something from scratch, and having a lot of autonomy and freedom. So that helps in terms of like the type of people to attract.
Yes.
In terms of story, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because I don't feel like we've been a mission-driven company. Like I feel like we look at like Val Foods and Tesla and SpaceX, and they're kind of really appealing to certain kinds of people who want to kind of change the world, and that hasn't really been the case for us. Like I think we've I've always wanted to have my own business and start a company, and worked in tech for 10, 15 years, and did computer science at university and then design. And so I've always wanted to have my own business and kind of experience that journey and grow a team and build a culture.
That's part of the story.
That is part of the story. And so I feel like we're like, okay, so the mission thing is kind of, we don't really tick that box for people unless you're really passionate about kind of customer knowledge and research and
Some people are, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. So like, designers and crafts people, product people love working on Dovetail, and the engineering challenges are quite tricky as well.
I can imagine.
So that's appealing. But when we think about like the value proposition, I think like, team and culture is really important. And I think that's grown a lot this year because we've gone from 3 to 20.
Yep.
We also just recently moved into a new office that we fitted out and spent a fair amount of money on for the size business we are.
Yep.
And the reason is that we want that impression, like people come into the office. And I feel like the office is like a physical manifestation of the culture. It's like a value. It highlights your values and what you care about. So
I think it should be. And I don't think enough people do that. And it's great that you...
Well, who wants to go to an office, like if you come for an interview or something like that, and it's like kind of lame, it's sort of, they haven't spent much money on the furniture, and it sort of looks not very light, and it's not low ceilings and stuff like that. So I feel like we spent a lot of time and money and care on the office and wanted to make it look really awesome. So our illustrator, she did like this mural along the wall when you come in, and it's really cool. And we have nice sit-stand desks, and we've chosen an office that's really light. It's got like polished concrete floor, and so we kind of wanted it to really represent us. And I feel like that it's our first office that's ours. Like it's not a co-working space, and it's made a huge difference this year. Like an enormous difference to the culture, the vibe, people's first impressions. Like interviewing is so much easier.
Yes,
bringing
Did you
people.
do it pre-COVID or post?
Post. So we just moved in like Well, there's a bit of a touch and go there where, we were like, well, because we're looking at the office before COVID, and then we put that on hold, and then we actually got a bit of a discount on the rent, which is nice. And then we fitted it out and moved in about 2 months ago.
Whereabouts are you?
In Devonshire Street, Surrey Hills, just by Burke Street Bakery.
I know it well.
So old brick building there, level 1. But yeah, so like the office is a huge thing, and I feel like we're just now trying to figure out like, well, we've got these really interesting engineering challenges, so that's appealing. We've got this great product and craft. The customers really help a lot too, like the social proof that having great logos, saying that we're used by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as a customer of ours, and the WWF, the Wildlife Fund. And so that's pretty cool. But we also have like banks like CBA, and we have software companies too. So it's a real diversity of customers, which helps attract. Because no one wants to be the first. And so like you want to kind of see that there's some traction there. And I don't think you want to be the first person really to join a company. Like there's a big upside, but the risk is also so proportional. So like, I think joining a company when it's about 10, 15, 20 people, like seed Series A, is like a perfect time, because you get, it's sufficiently de-risked, I think, by that point. But the equity grants and everything, the salaries can be market rate. And so you kind of have this really nice time to join.
It's an interesting, one of the things I've noticed dealing with anything from a bootstrap 2-person company up to private equity VCs all the way through ABCD is it's a very different kind of individual you hire at each level. It's a different mindset, and I think that's one of the things you learn as founders, is the people you hire at the beginning are not the same that you get a Series A, and they're definitely not the same you get a Series B, and it's a completely different human being.
Totally, yeah.
That's quite fascinating in itself.
Yeah, so recently I've been talking a lot about pirates and the Navy. So my executive coach, Ed, there's this article written by Reid Hoffman a few years back about Uber transitioning from a pirate ship to the Navy.
Yes.
And it's basically this idea that, startups, like early stage startups, are like a pirate ship. You have a single ship, it's not a fleet, so there's less, things to manage. You've got a group of people democratically elected, kind of like, captain and the first mate. And then it's a camaraderie sort of like respect and honesty sort of culture. And you go around kind of like disrupting the incumbents and stealing their treasure. And it's sort of like, so that's kind of the pirate ship.
I want to read this article. This sounds like a good article.
Yeah, and so that, and then like, people leave the Navy to become pirates because they're fed up with the bureaucracy and things like this. But then there's no such thing as a pirate fleet, and a pirate ship cannot colonize a country, right? So you need to, you need to transition from the pirates to the Navy and become more sophisticated and have more bureaucracy and have a fleet of ships and have a central command, and you appoint other captains to run their own ships, and there's a culture and there's more rules and things like that. But that's all required to run a bigger operation. So this article is about to transition from pirates to the Navy, but Ed's article is about how can you foster pirates in the Navy.
Okay.
So if you're a large company like Google or Atlassian, you want some of the elements of pirates, so the nimbleness, the agility, the disruption kind of like culture where you versus the world sort of thing. But you want them to operate within the sort of constraints or like the culture of a larger business that has to be more sophisticated because it's bigger. So we're kind of in this transition, over the next few years as we go from pirates to the Navy. The type of people at 5 people to 20 to 50 to 100, very different. And like some people will make that journey and they'll be happy about it and they'll grow, and other people won't. Like not everybody, some people are just pirates and they go from startup. And I think that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. So.
Great analogy. I like it. And out of all of that sort of that you've gone through and all the things that you're learning, what do you think has been the hardest thing for you guys, and we'll stay with you, Benjamin, to learn during the journey so far? What's been the hardest thing?
The hardest thing
that you've done? Maybe learning how to be an engineer. I don't know. It might not be.
Well, if I go way back to the beginning, like for me personally, the hardest thing was just the first 6 months or so starting out. So this is before Brad joined, but we were, it was just me, literally just me. And I was a designer at Atlassian, so I wasn't working on Dovetail during office hours and everything like that. So it's a weekend thing, it was a weeknight thing, and that's one of the reasons I chose Poland.
Yes.
Because the time zone overlap was really good. So I'd come home from work and then I'd chat to those guys and get them to build the product. And I chipped away, like I did a bit of coding, but my skill set was finite. It was design and
resilience,
front end, very resilient. So there were moments where I was just so frustrated and things weren't working, and I was breaking down in tears. And my girlfriend, who is an engineer, was helping me out. And back then we were using Ruby on Rails, and that was all unfamiliar to me. And so, trying to persevere and build a product. And the product we had back then was very different to what we have now. Like after Brad joined, we pivoted and changed the product. I'm also really have a high quality bar as a designer. And it's really frustrating that I couldn't implement the things that I wanted to do because I didn't have the skills.
Yeah.
So I just persevered. And I was actually on this holiday in New York and in DC in 2016. I was actually in DC for the election, not because of the election, just happened to be there. And we had launched the MVP of the first version of Dovetail, which I called Dovetail 1. And we had a few paying customers, and one of them was Pinterest, and they were running a diary study with the product. And it was all written in Ruby on Rails, and the Polish developers had finished up their contract, and it was just me having to maintain this piece of software. And it was broken, like it kept running out of memory, and I had to keep restarting the background workers and the application. And I was doing this on holiday in New York and DC, and I was just like stressing out. And first customer, you don't want to lose the first customer.
No, not Pinterest either.
No, and so so that was really, really stressful, and that was really hard. And I think at that moment on that trip, I realized like I'm not going to get anywhere if I can't find a technical co-founder. And people talk about being a solo founder, and I think that's if you can make that work, that's awesome. But I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, to be honest. I think having somebody who complements your skills is critical, and so that was hard. And then I had 3 people that I knew at Atlassian who were engineers that I was friends with that I wanted one of them as a co-founder, and I was trying to convince one of them to quit Atlassian with me and join. And so one of them actually works for us now, which is pretty exciting.
It is.
And so Brad was the one who ultimately took the plunge. But he believed in my vision and the dream and everything like that. And that took 6 months of having lunch every day, coffees every day, having drinks on Fridays.
Pure bribery. Pure bribery.
Yeah.
Coffee, drinks, whatever. Feeding him.
Yeah. Just trying to convince him to join. And I think that he saw the perseverance and he saw the customers, the early traction, and that's what helped. But that was hard. Like it's so much easier now that we have a bigger team.
Yeah.
Doing it yourself, not having all the skills, having to work with outsourced engineering and things like this in the early days. I put it on a $10,000 credit card and did the whole Atlassian founder thing. But that was really tricky. So that was like my really difficult moment was just that first 6 to 9 months.
Well, segues beautifully into my next question, which is my favourite one, which is beliefs, right? So you talked about him seeing the beliefs. So why don't we go back to you, Bradley? Tell me, is there anything, and look, this can be because you left Atlassian to go and work at a startup, it could be because of COVID, it could be because of anything, but have you had any beliefs that in recent years have changed? And I mean belief, something that you just believe. You know, it wasn't I've thought about that. You just, I don't know, for whatever reason you believe something, and now you perhaps see that differently.
Yeah, so that's a hard question.
It's a hard, that's why I tell you before you come, because I need you to have a think about that one.
Yeah,
it's a tough one.
I had a thought about it. I think some of the roles that really make a company successful, I didn't appreciate when I was just working as an engineer in a bigger company. Yeah. So, for example, when we were about 3 or 4, 5 people, we were just hiring people ourselves, right? Like we talk to people and try and convince them to join. We eventually moved to, like, we struggled there and we wanted to break outside our network, and we brought on an external recruiter. And they're not cheap, right? And so with our growth plans, we were looking at the financial side of it and saying, like, does it make sense to bring on a permanent recruiter into the company, hire a recruiter? And that was a totally new territory for me of like, is that the right move? That kind of seems weird. I mean, it makes sense financially, but I've never worked with a recruiter in a team before. I've worked in product teams. So that's strange. But we went ahead and did it. It made sense. And since then, I think my view on that's totally changed. So the person we hired, they moved more into a broader remit, a people role. And the impact that they've had has just been, incredible. So
I like it when people positively talk about recruiters.
It's the face. It's someone having full-time focus on this area of a company, and I think that's super important.
It's a skill. I think it's a skill, and you need time invested in it because it's so important.
Yeah.
It's an ironic thing that so many people say that the people's the most important thing, and yet they're not willing to spend any money on it. It's right. It's one of the things we've been talking about for years in our industry. So I'm glad that. And who is that you've got? Did they come from Atlassian, or were they from? Where did you find them?
They didn't.
Beth, she joined from EdApp. Yeah. So she was at EdApp before.
Okay, cool.
And then she worked in scene in Sydney, and then she moved over from the UK.
Yeah,
a couple of years back.
Not an English recruiter as well.
Yeah, well, they're everywhere. So.
Who'd have thought it?
Is there another kind?
I don't think there is anymore.
Name a more iconic duo.
Well, no more now because you can't get sponsored. Right. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think we're all going to be extinct. There'll be no recruiters in 20 years. We'll be gone.
What are we going to do?
Yeah, so I think for me, just like appreciating those other roles that I hadn't personally sort of experienced. I'd sort of benefited from their impact at Atlassian, but didn't really have a first-hand understanding of what is the value and when to bring them on in the company. So like that, we had that with sort of recruitment, but it's more people. Operations as well. I think that was another tricky one for me of like, what does an operations person do? What are they solving?
And there's the answer to, do we need one or not? The fact that you don't know what they do probably answers the question for you that maybe we do.
Yeah, so the unknown thing, and I think that's where, tying back into taking investment, having a bigger network, having people who've been there, done that, and can kind of advise you and give you suggestions. And, you don't have to fail to learn. You can just, have people tell you, well, this is a great path to take.
Yep.
So that, I think learning to take advice and trust that more, I think is probably one of the biggest differences if I compare like 3 years ago to now.
Cool. What about you, Benjamin? Any core beliefs that may have changed from, again, doesn't necessarily have to be by Dovetail, it's just a more general question. Obviously, it's a big impact on your life, so it's probably had something to do with it.
I think it's interesting, like joining a company like Atlassian, which has a great culture, in 2013, like, 11 years after they started, when there were a few hundred people. I was like the 17th person of a design team, and now the design team is like 150, 200 people. But
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is crazy. A lot of growth. But like one of the things I kind of took for granted, I think, when I left Atlassian was the culture and how that was sort of just like sort of implicit thing, and there was this kind of understanding, and specifically communication style. So Atlassian has this really kind of, I think it's quite unique, but not having worked at heaps of companies, it's kind of hard to say what's unique. But they have this really interesting kind of communication style, which is very blunt and honest. It's quite Australian, very written. They use compliments really heavily, and it's kind of this internal blog, and it's really really transparent and kind of radical candor style communication.
Yeah.
And it's sort of understood at Atlassian that that's the language everybody speaks, and it's like this common language. And when you join as a new hire, you kind of figure this out over a few months, and you get to sort of adapt your communication style to fit in with the way that everybody talks. And it's quite nice because it means that everyone can kind of modulate their communication for the audience, and you kind of have this level playing field, which is nice. But what I didn't realize is that you leave Atlassian, you go somewhere else. In this case, we started our own company, and none of that stuff just transfers over. You start from like a flat, blank state. And I thought that maybe the culture would sort of develop if we hired the right people. It would just sort of implicitly happen. It doesn't. Like, you have to sort of shape it and like actively work on it.
Yeah.
By delivering certain messages at certain times, by having one-on-ones with people, giving them feedback, and trying to create this culture of lots of small pieces of feedback, establishing values, and doing things like creating an office which describes what we're about, hiring certain people, revamping things like the culture interview, and making that really really awesome, so that it gets to people in the door that we want, that's going to fit in. So I think my belief was that culture kind of was implicit, and it just evolved over time on its own if you hired the right people. But my change there is that it's much more explicit, and it takes a lot of like active work on behalf of the founders and the early employees to sort of shape it. So I kind of think of it as like, sometimes like I think of it like Inception, the movie, where you have to like implant, some ideas in people's heads, and then they have to think it's their idea. Other times it's like you're just doing things that are trying to shape the culture and make it what you want it to be.
Absolutely. It's something that you have to create. It doesn't, if you let it evolve, it can be awful.
Yeah, so you don't want to just let it, I think that's my realization is, as founders, you don't just want to say like, oh, we hire good people, the culture will figure itself out. Even if you do hire good people, that you still have to kind of really kind of actively work on shaping the culture. Continuously, yeah. And everything you do as one of the founders, you communicate the way what you say, what you choose to say, what you choose not to say. When somebody does something that's a bit weird and you go, oh, that's a bit weird, do you call it out or not? Because if you don't, then it's implicitly you're agreeing with that behavior. And so starting to learn a lot more about that sort of thing. Because at Atlassian, I wasn't really involved in shaping the culture. I just fitted into an existing culture. But with Dovetail, we have to kind of establish that from day one ourselves. And we've been focusing a lot on that this year with all our new hires, and especially with early employees, I think reinforcing that culture all the time as well, so that it scales. And because I can't go talk to everyone, so like, you need that early group of people to manifest them.
I'll tell you what, those are two of the best answers we've had, so well done. Those were crackers. Because some people have just looked at me and gone, I've thought about this for 3 days, I've still got no idea. So those two were great. Cool. All right. Everyone always wants to know podcasts, particularly. If there's any books you could mention you want to, but let's start with podcasts because more people have less time to read and more time to drive and listen to podcasts. So is there any particular podcast, and this is great because, you go on and there's so many, it's great to hear what people are listening to. What are you listening to, or is there anything that you've particularly liked?
I casually listened to Coronacast. That's been pretty awesome. It's my daily little feed of what is happening in Australia.
It is quite cool, that. I got put onto that by someone who came onto the show.
Right.
Actually,
yeah, it's great. And then 7 a.m. as well is sort of my news hit of like what is kind of happening that I should somewhat be aware of. I don't listen to them too much. It can be a little bit, draining. You don't. Sometimes it's nice
you want music, right?
tune out from what is happening and focus on your own life. And then, but more recently, I've started listening to Darknet Diaries, which is one of my colleagues actually put me onto it, and it's about hacking stories. So Darknet, as in hacking on the web.
Yep.
And it's an interesting one. It's a storytelling style podcast.
It's factual, not fictional.
It's factual. Factual about factional.
Maybe it's factional as well. I don't know.
I think it's factual.
You just invented a word.
And it's about going back to 2010, what are kind of big hacking events in the world? What's the story behind them? What happened? And it gives me a healthy level of paranoia, I think, about, what could be company-ending events in terms of data leakage, security problems. And that's very useful for the type of product that we're running, the type of data that people upload. It's cool.
Cool. Benjamin?
I don't really do podcasts, but
That's okay, but you're going to watch the YouTube channel, I'm sure.
Yeah, I watch the YouTube channel. I read a bit.
You read a bit?
So I have a New Yorker subscription. It's my favorite magazine. I actually love the New Yorker, and everyone knows this, so it's
true. You certainly do now.
It's a thing. But I think the New Yorker is amazing. So like my strategy with news is it's kind of a little. It's kind of embracing the one. Like I trust the New Yorker to sort of be my filter, and like I align.
Independently, like it's not biased in any way.
I mean, they're very liberal, like very left-leaning, but they're also long-running, and I feel like they present a fairly pragmatic view sometimes. But I just love the writing style. I love the thought that goes in, the research that goes into the articles. They're always really interesting. Like you read an article about like fire ants, and then you read an article about politics, and then you read an article about like a profile of a photographer, and it's really diversified, and it comes once a week. I get the print. I actually get the magazine too because I love the kind of physical deal. We have a subscription at the office now, and we have a content marketing team, and my brief to them is make our content marketing like the New Yorker for product teams.
Jeez, that's like pretty big call.
It's a high bar.
It is a high bar.
So I think I just love like the illustrations, the comedy, the cover is always different. It's been going for over 100 years. It's just like for me, it's just quality journalism, and I just love like consuming that. So I just read that when I have time. The problem with the New Yorker is that no one ever really keeps up with them. You have to be retired, I think, because it's like, I have this huge stack. So I'm about 12 months behind at the moment. So it's interesting because you read it and you're like, oh, we haven't actually got to COVID-19 yet. Like that hasn't even developed yet. So I'm reading about other things.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah, at the moment, and then I'll get to COVID-19. So I'm sort of 12 months in the past, but most of their articles are not. They're not as sort of timely in the sense that they're timeless. Like an article on fire ants is relevant no matter what time you read it. So
that's true. Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
So
last question. Now you kind of touched on this earlier a little bit, Bradley. So I'm going to ask this directly to you, Benjamin. But if you're obviously going to continue to grow. And I'm not sure if you're growing right now, but even if you're not, if someone is interested in you or if you are hiring, why would someone in your mind want to come and work for Dovetail? Tell me the pitch that you have both developed over these last few years.
Sure. Yeah. So we are still growing. Like we want to get to about 50 people next year. So we've got 20 to 50.
That's a lot.
So 30. Yeah.
That's a lot of roles.
Some of that'll be in the US, where we're opening up an office, hopefully in Austin.
Yep.
Which will be a little tricky with COVID and everything, but hopefully a vaccine comes out and we can travel over there. But so growing a team here from 20 to 37, most of that's engineering. The thing I was thinking about with this question is, for us, or for me specifically, I think it's the quality bar that we have and the craft. Like we try and hire people who genuinely love the craft that they are, doing. Yep. Like we have this kind of internal joke where Brad and I are like the makers because we're referred to as the makers in an AFR article earlier in the year. And I think that like everything we do kind of is a representation of how much we value quality. So, like for instance, our office, just to go back to that analogy, everything we've kind of sweated the details on. Like we have nice furniture. We have this mural that Lisa, our illustrator, made, and she spent like a week painting it, agonizingly painting it.
Yep.
And everything we've selected there is kind of intentional. And then the product, it's a great manifestation of quality. We try and sweat the details and have a really beautiful experience for people. And then the engineering, technical side, and marketing, content marketing, trying to be the New Yorker. So I think that I have this, when I started Dovetail, my goal, which is kind of, it sounds crazy to say it, but like, it's to be the best that we can be, the best in the world at every single thing we do. So like have the best interview process for candidates, have the best office, have the best product, the best marketing.
Doesn't sound crazy at all. Sounds great.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a stupid idea because you can't really be the best at everything because otherwise you make no trade-offs. But so it's not very pragmatic. But I think the idea of like just trying to be really, really good and just pushing ourselves higher and higher. So I think people who want to come and work on something and have this quality bar and like really push themselves to be better and work with people who are really passionate about what they do, that is what I try and sell, and that's kind of what our culture values.
It's the striving. It's not being the best. It's striving to be.
Striving to be the best. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I don't think like we're not actually the best. That would be too.
Must be some things, I'm sure.
I think we have a pretty good product, but like it can always be better. So I think it's like.
That's why you need these people.
Exactly. I think it's difficult because you don't want to be like always unhappy. I struggle with this, like where it's always like it's never good enough. So then you're always unhappy, which kind of sucks. But so I think like.
You can use the word driven rather than unhappy.
Yeah.
Nicer word.
Always trying to improve.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Unhappy, yeah, you don't want to be unhappy. But
yeah, so like people who want to operate in an environment like that.
Well, there are plenty of people who do, and they get very frustrated in environments where others don't. So you're after a certain person, and your environment will suit that person.
100%, yeah. So like we're the enemy of complacency, hopefully.
I like that.
So if you're working in a company where it's kind of everyone's complacent and just kind of cruising, resting, investing, then I reckon Dovetail's a good spot.
When we edit this up, I'm going to cut that. We are the enemy of complaints. Just cut that a little bit out and just keep repeating it onto LinkedIn just before we release the episode. Boys, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed having one guest on that I'd never met before, because that's been quite cool, but two, learning about what you're doing. And I love what you're doing, and I love the way you're going about it, and I think it's great.
Awesome.
Thanks very much,
Steve. Yeah.
Pleasure being here.
Great.